Hey, what's up everyone? Quinton Figueroa with SlayerMint.com. And in this video, I want to talk to you about how an economy, a legal system, and a society might work with something like Bitcoin and Ethereum, basically a blockchain type society, a blockchain type economy. And this is an interesting topic that interests me quite a bit, and I've thought quite a bit about it, and I'd like to kind of give you my take on it and share kind of some insights that I might have on it, and hopefully kind of, maybe show you some interesting stuff. So let's start off with how just in general industries evolve, right? So we have different industries like the finance industry, the education industry, the media, these different industries, and over time they improve, they evolve, they have technological advancements, they have, innovations and things like that, and they get better. Granted, there's fair competition and that type of thing. And so, with education, you see kind of the traditional like college type approach. You kind of see the internet coming along and disrupting that a little bit with like Google and YouTube, where now people can get similar education. They can kind of learn things that you would normally learn in school. They can get that kind of for cheap or for free just on the internet. So you have the internet kind of coming in and revamping the whole education industry. You have schools going online, yada, yada, yada. Now, media, similar type thing. You have kind of old school media like the newspaper and television, things like this where people used to get their news and they might get an update like once a day, or they might go tune into the 6 o'clock news or whatever, that kind of thing. But now stuff like CNN and these news channels are starting to fall behind because the internet can provide us news quicker, and we can get the news straight from the horse's mouth rather than getting it from some middleman like CNN, right? We can just go follow a company on Twitter. They'll post an announcement, we'll get it immediately, where the news, catch up like an hour later and say like, this happened. You're like, yeah, I kind of know that. I just read about it. So news is kind of becoming outdated because we don't need that middleman anymore as much, right? We can go straight to the news source ourselves. They don't need to report to them, and they don't need to give that information and relay it to us. So we have that happening with the media. And then of course we have the financial industry. And now the financial industry, we're not seeing, so we're seeing this kind of happen, this disruption happen with Bitcoin, but it's a little bit different, and it's kind of, it's just different because with Bitcoin or the finance industry, you don't see as much competition in the finance industry as you do in, say, education or media. And the reason for that is that you have kind of more of a government interference or regulation where it's a lot harder to start up a bank. Like, it's really hard for me to go compete with Goldman Sachs or Bank of America because of the legalities, because of a lot of different aspects, that a lot of barriers to entry that don't exist in certain industries, other industries that are less, I guess, lucrative or less influential. So when you get into kind of these heavy hitting industries like finance, now we're talking about something really serious. Now we're talking about government involvement and people that are going to make it harder for you to compete against them. That's kind of the nature of that and the way this works. So basically, like most people know, government and finance, the banks and government kind of work closely together, right? Banks pretty much kind of run the government, vice versa. So you're not going to see as much competition in these industries, like I said, and they know that competition is a bad thing for them, because when we have competition, it puts the old businesses out of business unless they adapt, right? And if you don't want to adapt, or if adapting means losing some type of control that you have, you're not going to want to do that. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the old banking sector. And that's why so many people behind Bitcoin are excited about it, because that's the exact industry they want to disrupt, because banking hasn't been disrupted for freaking like centuries. And it's time for it to get a revamp, and time for us to actually have competing currencies and things like this. And the banking industry does not like that. And you can look at an example. So when the internet first came around, people are like, oh, sweet, the internet, this is digital, people are connected, let's freaking use the internet to send money around, right? It's obvious, like, let's send money with the internet. That's a great use of the internet. And so you had a company like eGold come around, and they're like, yeah, let's do a gold-backed currency and make it digital. It makes sense. It'd be a great service for people rather than them keeping their money in some fiat currency like dollars or euros. Let's just give them a bank account with us and let them transfer gold to people. So that's kind of what's going on there. That's what they were doing, and that was their service. And of course, the old school banking sector, not happy about this. I mean, that's direct competition to their currency. And yeah, although it might be small, they know that that could grow and become big. And they're like, screw you guys, you're not going to mess with us. So they do what they can. They use the government to get rid of them. They get rid of the competition, right? So they come in and they find, anything they can, like any type of dirt, any story they can make up or come up with to get rid of them. So they say, okay, well, these guys are laundering illegal funds. They're money laundering drugs or whatever. Even though the freaking government through the CIA is like the biggest drug runner in the whole world. But forget that. These guys are running drugs and that's bad. So let's get rid of them, right? The finance industry does not like competition. They do not like this e-gold coming around and messing with them. So they're like, let's get rid of them. We'll come up with whatever we need to get rid of them. And so that's what they do. And then that company, gets shut down by the government. So there they go. They're gone. Right? So that's how this works. And so people were using e-gold as like a digital currency. They would do illegal stuff with it. That's going to happen. People use dollars for money laundering. It's not like people don't do illegal things with current stuff we have. So people were doing like illegal drug stuff, but they were also, of course, doing legal things with it. But the important thing to realize here is that e-gold is pretty much the exact same as Bitcoin. Bitcoin does everything e-gold does. It's digital. You can transfer it online, yada, yada, yada. The one big difference, though, is that Bitcoin is decentralized, right? So e-gold is centralized, and it's a business that is owned by an entity, by some group of people, where Bitcoin isn't owned by anyone. And this is the big difference, and this is the disruption that Bitcoin causes. Because with e-gold, the government just goes and finds whoever owns it, whoever the people behind it are, and they go target them, and they're done. That's it. With Bitcoin, who do you target? Who do you go after? What do you do? It's like you can't. It's hard to stop. How do you stop it? You go and say, okay, we're not happy about this Bitcoin. Let's go take out the owner. It's like, oh, wait, there is no owner. Okay, well, let's take out the guy who's making money. There's some type of profit going on. It's like, okay, well, miners are making profits, but there's lots of different miners and it's totally distributed. And like, who are them? How do you track the miners down? It's like, there's freaking thousands of miners. It's like, who are the miners? And what are we going to do? It's like, it's so distributed, you can't freaking stop it. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why it's so disruptive in the financial space and why people like myself are excited to see kind of what it does. It's an interesting thing. And of course, though, you have to realize the banks don't like Bitcoin. They don't like it, but they can't do much about it. It's like they're kind of stuck in a difficult place now because Bitcoin came up with a way to get around kind of their control. And that is a problem for them. So yeah, at the higher levels, right? So in a normal market, you kind of have competition and that kind of thing. But the higher levels, they don't want competition. They don't want to have to change and that kind of stuff. And so at this level of like finance, you can't just come along like in a normal industry and be like, we came up with a better way to do finance. Doing something better doesn't matter. Look what happened to e-gold. They came up with a better way to do like transfers with currency. They came up with a better way to store your money with gold rather than with some type of fiat currency, or at least to the customers see it as better. And it's like customers kind of can have that preference. But being better isn't enough. You have to be better and also be indestructible. You have to be better and unable to be stopped, right? So e-gold was better, but it could be stopped. Bitcoin's better, but it can't be stopped. And that's kind of the real interesting part about Bitcoin and a blockchain is that you can't really stop it. It's like it's better and you can't stop it. So that is an important thing to realize here. So yeah. Now we come to the question of an economy. So Bitcoin is great for currency and Bitcoin being built on a blockchain. So, of course, many people ask, can this Bitcoin concept of a blockchain, a decentralized blockchain, can that be used for an economy, right? Because it's like, okay, if it's making the banking industry better, why don't we make like the economic industry, government industry, these other non-currency industries better? Where else can we apply the freaking blockchain, right? So now when we talk about an economy, right, when we talk about kind of trade and resources and this type of thing, we're kind of talking about government, because most economies are heavily tied to, if not one in the same, with the government. So economy, government, they go hand in hand. And saying that we want to have a different economy than what we currently have is almost akin to saying we want to have a different government. And that is kind of a little bit of a dangerous place to be, because you don't want to mess with the government. They don't like competition. They don't want to mess with, you're basically, this could be kind of framed treasonous, or it could be framed as you're a really bad person for being against your government because you want to make it better. So when you're talking about a blockchain economy, the same way the banks don't get excited about that, the government doesn't get excited about a blockchain economy. That's even worse than a blockchain bank. So you have to understand this is a very sensitive subject, and you have to be very careful kind of how you do this or go about it, because you don't want to upset the government. So it's you want to improve government, of course, you want to improve the economy, but there are people in government and people who kind of run things that don't want to give up that control to make something better. They would rather have it their way, even if it's inferior, because it's better for them personally. They have a better life running it the way it is, even if advancing it might be better for everyone. And in a normal industry, when you advance something, that company might go out of business. But the government doesn't want to go out of business. And talking about the government going out of business is a crazy thing to talk about. So we have to kind of understand what's going on with that. And there's a quote by Aristotle who basically says this. He says, quote, "It is not always the same thing to be a good man and a good citizen." Because being a good citizen, if your country is doing something that's bad or not good, say your country wants to go to war for no real reason other than to take over resources or something, and you're no, I'm against this. It's now you're a bad citizen, but you might be a good man for being against war. So you're in a tough spot, right? So this is kind of what we're dealing with the blockchain. It's I want to bring government forward. It's yeah, but you're against the way government currently is. You're anti-government. So it's are you a good man or are you a good citizen? It's how can you be both? Can you be both? So you're on a little bit of shaky ground. And you have to be careful, because if you upset somebody higher up in government, or even if you don't do anything illegal, even if you're just trying to improve government, you're doing something, you're not breaking laws, but you're doing what you're doing, they would still, if it's something that they see as threatening, they could still come and find something that you did wrong, and they'll come after you, and they'll make an example of you. Look, all you have to do is look no further than Ross Ulbricht, the creator of the Silk Road, right? So Ross Ulbricht, he created the Silk Road, which was an online marketplace. It's basically kind of what I'm talking about. It's so, in a way you could call it a blockchain economy. It's not necessarily an economy, it's more like an eBay type site. It's more like a place where people could go exchange things, and they could use Bitcoin as the currency to do that, and you basically can exchange anything. It's like a free market, basically. And the government obviously not happy about this at all. This is kind of what I'm talking about. It's threatening to them because they don't want people to have kind of that freedom. They don't want people to work outside of their system, or they don't want to have to change their system to be better, to meet more the demands of the citizens who live there. So of course, so with any new technology also, like the Silk Road, you're going to have fringe areas that are normally not legal, like drugs, firearms, prostitution. These kind of things are always more common in newer markets and industries or with newer technologies because they can be serviced there. And these are kind of what drive the innovation because that's what people want. So like if you even look at like DVDs or cassette tapes, it's like the thing driving these technologies was not freaking Disney movies. They were porn movies. Porn's like always ahead of the curve when it comes to this type of thing. Same with the internet. Porn was like always ahead of the curve, still is ahead of the curve with internet and mobile. Like porn sites were doing mobile video freaking way before YouTube was doing mobile video. It's like they know where the technology is going and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the point being, yeah, there was drug stuff going on with the Silk Road, but that's not the focus or vision for it. And if you read what freaking Ross Ulbricht would write about it, his vision was a free market, a free open market that people could exchange with. And of course, people were doing drug stuff on it because that is kind of what drives it, but there were other things going on it too. But government knows this could be a problem for them. So of course, they give him a life sentence. They give him multiple life sentences to prison, and he's put away for life. And it's like one of the saddest stories there is because this is a very brilliant, innovative person contributing to the human family in a way that so few people do, trying to make people's lives better, and he gets put away. It's like we take our best people, we take a guy who can contribute so much to society, and we just get rid of it for this lifetime, and then he's done. He's no longer contributing. Somebody who can contribute immensely. It's just like ridiculously sad and insane. And this is what we're dealing with when you're talking about creating an economy or doing something kind of outside of government. It's very problematic. It's risky. It's something you really got to think about and kind of weigh the consequences and tread very lightly and be very careful. It's serious stuff. Like these guys don't take competition lightly. They don't freaking mess around. It's not like some mom and pop shop where they're like, oh, okay, we're out of business, but you're providing this service, you beat us fair and square. This is like the mafia, like, oh, okay, you're coming in on our territory, we'll just freaking kill you and move on. Done deal. So it's not a joke. So that is what's going on with an economy, kind of some thoughts on it, and you have to really put it in perspective and look at the scope. You can't be like some naive college student coming in here like, oh, I'm technical, I studied computer science, I understand blockchains, I'm gonna go compete against the government. It's like, are you stupid? They're gonna whack you so fast. They're going to do anything they can to stop you, and they have freaking all the power to do so. So you can't just come in naive. They'll freaking make an example of you. They'll make you start working with them, and they'll hold that against you. It's like these guys, that's what they've been doing for a long time. That's part of why government has so many problems. It's very corrupt. I mean, people know this. I'm not stating anything controversial, and I'm not against government or anti-government. I'm just saying these are kind of the things that happen when you're dealing with a big edifice like government. You're going to have kind of corrupt people. You're going to have people who want to control it because it has so much power, and it's going to kind of breed that type of personality in people. And, if you study history, world history, governments, see where they came from and see kind of who controls them, who controls banking, it's pretty obvious what's going on. So this isn't super controversial stuff that I'm saying, but you have to at least recognize it and consider. You can't just be some naive freaking person coming in like, I'm just going to compete and do a better job and everybody's going to be happy. It's like, no, they're not happy if you do a better job. They freaking don't want better. Why do you think it sucks so bad? A lot of the things. It's like people in power don't want better. They want to stay in power. Okay, so I'm not being negative. I'm a very optimistic, happy person, but I'm trying to just kind of state pieces that are important if we want to talk about this, because we need to kind of have as much information as possible and kind of look at it from a big picture perspective. Okay, so let's talk about let's move on to kind of the next part. So cover the economy a little bit. One sec. Take a sip of liquids. Okay, so now there's an important part about the blockchain that we need to understand. So there's two parts that I want to kind of contrast or compare. You have competition and then you have decentralization. And these are two components that we kind of need to understand how they work and what their advantages are and disadvantages, so we can kind of see how something like an economy could take place. So in most cases, if you have like a free market, if you have competition in an industry, that's going to improve it, right? And we see this with sports. Like if you take American football or something, you have these athletes, and as time goes on, it gets more and more competitive. They train harder, they get better, and you have super, super good athletes. You have super, like a high quality of competition and skill, and it's fun to watch because these people are that good because they train really hard and they get really good. It's like they compete against each other and they keep one-upping each other and getting better and better. So we see that with sports, right? And you see the exact same thing in business. So if you have like an industry like, say, mobile phones, you see different people competing against each other. You see carriers competing against each other. They kind of undercut. They try to offer unlimited data. They do it cheaper and cheaper. They, point out the competitor's weaknesses, and, now the competitor has to change and do a better job. You see it with mobile phones. You have Samsung, you have Apple, you have different companies, and it's like before the iPhone, everything was like a flip phone and it kind of sucked. The iPhone comes out and everybody's like, dang, that's freaking really good. These guys nailed it. So like a year later, everybody copies them with Android, and now Android phones like Samsung, LG, they all have that type of phone, and then, they keep, competing and doing different things. Apple will come out with something and they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Okay, now Android comes out with it, copies it, and then Apple copies them, and that's competition. That's how markets get better, right? So it's important to understand that competition in a free market is going to make the quality better and the price cheaper. That's why cell phones, we don't freaking talk on a brick like we did 20 years ago. We talk on like an elegant phone, and it fits in your freaking pocket, and it's really easy to carry, and it's not inconvenient like a brick. And that's what innovation does and free markets. Now, you'll have something like the medical industry, and things in the medical industry, especially in the US, they're not getting cheaper. The medical industry, things get more expensive, and it's more expensive to get stuff done in the medical industry. Even things like pills, which are very cheap to manufacture, are more expensive. And the question is why? Well, the answer should be obvious if you understand markets. It's because we don't have a free market. The medical industry is heavily tied to and regulated by the government, and that includes the insurance that goes with it. So we don't have free market medical insurance, we don't have free market medicine, we don't have free markets in the whole medical industry. People can't just go in and create a product. You have to get approved by the FDA, you have to go through certain hoops and that kind of thing. It's not quite dissimilar than the financial industry. You have kind of this bigger medical industry. It's like, you want to compete here, it's going to cost you lots of money, and the big boys aren't going to let you in easy. So that's why it's so expensive there. So if you want better quality, you need competition, and if you don't have competition, you're not going to get better quality. Look at the medical industry. Compare medicine to mobile. Mobile, pretty much a free market, and look at the advancements in phones and that kind of thing. It's like phones are too good. It's like, what else are you going to do to a freaking phone? It's so good now. Medicine, freaking, like the quality might be okay, but the price is so expensive, and it's not getting cheaper, it's getting more expensive. It's like, there's a huge problem here. And it's like, what's going on? No competition. That's what's going on. I can't go start a medical company and start giving pills to somebody without going through certain hoops, and that drives the prices up and all that. So the competition thing is important to kind of understand that as a cornerstone to creating better products and improving our lives. Competition is going to make things better, right? So sometimes it's not about like a new technology making something better, right? So in particular, I'm talking about a blockchain, like the blockchain with Bitcoin. Just saying like the medical industry sucks, it needs a blockchain, that's not gonna freaking make it better. The medical industry doesn't need a blockchain, the medical industry needs competition, right? So it's like a blockchain isn't the end-all solution to everything. You can't just say blockchain, and if like industries don't have blockchain, and now they do, they're gonna be better. That's not how it works, because a blockchain, it won't provide that kind of value. It's different on what it does and the whole decentralized aspect of it. So here's the important piece here. A blockchain serves a very important purpose that a lot of people miss because you kind of have to, I guess, study it a little bit to kind of see how it works and understand it. So here's an important takeaway here. The blockchain allows for competition to occur in an industry where competition may not exist, or where it may not be legal or easy to compete. So if we revisit the finance industry, it's not easy to become Bank of America or to compete against them in the finance industry. You have regulations and all the government kind of stuff to compete, right? So if you could compete in the finance industry, it would improve. But we can't compete, or it's very hard. You have to be like an insider or whatever. You basically can't compete in the finance industry. But blockchain, a decentralized blockchain, does allow you to compete because so like if you compare it to e-gold, because a blockchain can't be stopped, you get to compete and they can't take you out like they normally would, right? So this is a very important thing. It's like blockchain does allow you to compete in an industry where you normally can't. So that's like the value of it, or an important part of it. It's like a cheat code where you're like, okay, I'm going to inject myself in here anyway, and I don't care what you say, and I'm going to compete, and that's just the way it is. You can't stop me. It's like you have God mode, and you're like, whatever, I'm still competing, and too bad. I got a decentralized blockchain. What are you going to do about it? And there's not much they can do about it in certain industries or certain applications, and you see that with the finance industry and currency. So you can't. We couldn't compete by creating a currency like e-gold and doing that type of thing. So we had to come up with a better way. You had to come up with not just better technology, but you had to come up with a way where you can't be stopped. And that is what the blockchain, a decentralized blockchain, allowed you to do. It's like, I'm in here and I'm competing. So that is important to understand, right? And when we're talking about a blockchain, we need to look at it in this way because in a lot of cases, you might just need competition and a blockchain might not be the answer, right? So like in the mobile industry, it's like you don't just say, I'm going to throw a blockchain at it. It's like, what's that going to do? It's like we just need competition. We can have competition. Competition is going to create better innovations than just a blockchain, so it doesn't necessarily solve that. So if we're going to use a blockchain, we need to realize it's going to be in some type of use where it's like you need to be able to compete somewhere you can't, and that's where a blockchain might come in. And that's why with like an economy or government or something like that, there might be an application there because normally it's not too easy to compete against the government. It's not easy to create a government, but maybe you could create some of those services through a blockchain and inject yourself in anyway, and you might be good to go. And this whole kind of decentralized blockchain approach is like an agorist approach. It's like counter economics where you're basically competing anyway. You're like saying, I'm going to do this outside of the current system and I don't care, I'm just going to do this better anyway, and you move on. And that's interesting. I kind of like that. And I think a lot of people do. Okay, so anyway, it's important to realize kind of that aspect of the blockchain. Now, how do we create an economy on a blockchain? So again, by doing something like this, we're stepping on the government's toes, right? So government heavily tied to economy, wanting to create a government or economy on a blockchain, you're already really, you might be causing some problems. So we really need to look at the scope and the big picture of this and kind of think of kind of what the ramifications are of doing this. Now, we have to think about how we would want to do an economy on a blockchain, right? So are we talking about something like the Silk Road or something like where you have an eBay that uses Bitcoin or blockchain for currency, and you have kind of this blockchain currency marketplace system? It's like, is that what we're talking about if we want to do an economy on a blockchain? And if that's so, that's not really anything new because we already have that. We can already do that. So that's not anything special, right? So that doesn't matter much. Okay, so maybe it's not that. Okay, so maybe we want to have an economy that follows current government laws, right? We don't want to break laws. So we want to follow the current laws of governments, but we still want to have a blockchain. It's like, well, that doesn't really make sense either. Because if we're following government laws, we don't need a blockchain to compete. It's like if you're going to follow the laws, then you don't use a blockchain. A blockchain lets you bypass the laws, or lets you bypass like the controls and the regulations. This is kind of what happens in the finance industry. It's like if you're going to follow the finance industry's laws and be like, I'm going to use a blockchain, it's like, no, you're not, because a blockchain is counter to like the current way they do things. A blockchain is bypassing the laws and the regulations. So it's like, that doesn't make sense. So it's weird. It's like you're kind of maybe not necessarily breaking the laws, but you're definitely not following all the regulations and the guidelines that might be needed. And that is why you have to be careful with this type of thing. It's like you're bypassing the hurdles that are there for most businesses. You're bypassing that stuff if you're going to do something with the blockchain, right? So if you're like, okay, so if you say, okay, well then I want to have a blockchain economy, you have to realize the ramifications of that. That basically means I want to bypass government. I want to do an economy like outside of the current laws. But that's like a big problem, because now you're dealing with breaking the law. It's like this is why this type of discussion or this type of thing, I don't think it's as easy or as simple or as fun as people think. It's like you're dealing with something really heavy here. So we have to really be careful what we're talking about here, because if you're going to do a blockchain economy, you're basically talking about replacing government laws. You're basically talking about being your own government or doing things your own way outside of the government law. And you obviously can't do this within government, right? It's like, so the core of an economy is like trade, two people exchanging things. That's like a big part of an economy, right? But how is this trade enforced? Like if you were going to have a blockchain and you were going to do an economy, how are you going to enforce that somebody actually does a trade and that they didn't commit fraud or that they were honest or this type of thing? It's like in a normal government, you have police to do that. You have a threat of violence, right? So government basically has a monopoly on violence, and that is how they enforce contracts and law and this type of thing. And if you break the law and if you go against your contract or this type of thing, they'll fine you or they'll throw you in jail, right? So it's going to come down to violence if they need to deal with you. And overall, it works pretty well for the government. That's like what all governments do, is they use violence. But the government is the final say. It's like you're not the final say. You don't get to create your own little world inside the government and say, no, I'm doing it this way. It's okay. It's like they don't care what you say. They're going to throw you in jail. So if you're creating a blockchain, some type of economy, it's like you don't get to supersede the laws of the government. It's like you don't get to make the rules. The government is a framework you're working within. And if you go outside of their laws, it's like they're going to do something about that. It's obvious what I'm saying, right? You can't supersede their laws. But the very nature of a blockchain economy kind of works towards that, or that is kind of how it would work. So you're in a really interesting perspective. You're in a really interesting predicament here. Okay, so let's talk about another aspect of this. Now, a currency blockchain like Bitcoin is different than a non-currency blockchain. So I'm going to get a little bit more technical here, but it's kind of important to talk about when dealing with kind of the technicals of how this would work on a blockchain. So with currency like Bitcoin, the actual product you're using, the actual thing that's going on the blockchain is your actual transaction. It is your actual balance in your account and this type of thing, right? So when you create a transaction and it goes on a block, that is stored on a block, and then another block is created on top of that, and all this is stored in like a history. So everything is self-contained in the blockchain when it comes to currency. But if we want to use a blockchain for something like an economy, things outside of just currency, now let's say you want to use it for something like trade. So rather than trading currency between two parties, I want to trade, like I want to get a car from Jimmy and I'll give him $20,000, right? So how does this take place on a blockchain? Because the car is a physical product. So you can't have like a physical blockchain of cars. It's like, that doesn't really make sense. You can't just, like, I need to use the car. It's like my car is not going to be on the blockchain. It's going to get used. It won't stay the same way forever. So it's different than a currency, right? So if I'm doing a trade, it's like, yeah, I could give them the money. But when we're dealing with like a physical product, a blockchain is a chain of digital products. It's a chain of digital stuff, right? So when we're dealing with physical stuff, it's like you can't really build a blockchain on that. And you might say, okay, well, why don't we build a representation of it on a blockchain? So like the car, rather than putting the physical car on a physical blockchain, let's just say, okay, this car, let's give it like an ID or something. Let's say the title of the car belongs on this blockchain. So it's like a digital representation of it. Okay, but how do we know I actually got the car, or that there wasn't fraud involved, or that the car was, meets a certain specification? It's like, so when you're dealing with non-currency stuff in a blockchain, right? When you're dealing with non-currency stuff, you now have the problem, or the thing to think about, which is trust. So how do you handle trust when you're not talking about currency? Because with currency, the trust is built in. The transaction happens, you see all the details there. Every new block that comes in confirms the trustworthiness of the previous transactions that happened. So everything's there. It's like the trust, I don't need to trust anybody. I don't care who anybody is, what it is. Everything's there. It all checks out. It's clean. But with non-currency, like a trade on a blockchain, trust is a problem. And this is something that would kind of need to be figured out, because the trust element works for currency, but it doesn't work for non-currency. How do you trust that somebody actually sent the car and didn't just rip me off, right? So that is an interesting problem, and it's something to think about. And you have something like, Ethereum come along, and they have smart contracts, and Ethereum is basically like a blockchain API where people can execute code within a blockchain. But even there, you're still running into the trust problem. It's like, yeah, you could have contracts, you can have value exchange, you can do all this stuff on a blockchain, but when you're dealing with things that aren't innately contained on the blockchain, how do you verify that? How do you trust that? And how do you know it is what it is? You don't. At least there's no way that anybody has come up with right now where you do, and that's kind of a problem. And that is something where if you want to do an economy, or you want to use blockchain in non-currency ways, you got to kind of figure this stuff out, because it's not easy, and it's or maybe it is easy, I don't know, but it's not straightforward like you would think. You start to run into issues where currency, because of what currency is and the way it works, you don't have these kind of issues. And so yeah, it's important to understand what's going on, so maybe we could come up with a solution on how to do this. We need to first understand kind of what the parameters are. So we need to kind of try to go there like we are, and realize, okay, yeah, we have a trust issue. Bitcoin doesn't have trust issues because of how currency works, because it's digital and because it can all be contained there. But how do we do that with something else? That is where you need to put your thinking cap on and figure it out. Okay, so here's the thing. Trust is something that can be digital, I think. So trust and like laws. So we've kind of discussed creating your own laws. Like, you got to be really careful, and violence, terrible idea. Like, we're told as kids not to use violence to get your way, but countries do it and they think that's okay, but whatever. Violence, I think most civilized people think violence is a bad idea to do things and not the way to solve problems. So if we're going to kind of do this law, trust aspect of a blockchain, we probably want to do it in a nonviolent way. And the good thing about nonviolence is nonviolence can be a digital way. And the good thing about a digital way is now you're talking about something that you could maybe build into the blockchain, like currency. And kind of my thoughts on this is, I would think some type of reputation system might work with something like this. right? So we have sites like Amazon and eBay, lots of sites out there, and a lot of them you have a reputation on them. You have, people can review you, people can rate you, and the trust aspect is based on your reputation. So like if you're on eBay and you're going to buy something from China and you're like, okay, well, how do I trust this guy? It's like, well, you look at their reputation, right? That's what you do. And the trust is built around the reputation. So if the person has like sold 10,000 items, they have a 99.8% positive review rating, it's like, okay, this person in China is pretty trustworthy. It's like, I mean, there's a lot of people that are happy with them. I feel pretty confident that they're going to follow their word. They're going to do what they say. And moreover, if they don't, it's like, well, I can at least give them a negative mark and I can hurt their reputation. So it's like, that's a good thing too, right? So you have kind of this reputation aspect of sites like eBay and other sites where that can kind of be the trust system, right? So it's like we say that it's like if you're on eBay, it's like, would you rather buy from a new person with no reviews or a trusted person with lots of reviews and lots of positive reviews? It's like the trusted person now has kind of this equity built behind them. That's an advantage, and the new person has to kind of work their way in, and they might have to sell things cheap or whatever. And that's a good thing. It's like, that is kind of how this should work. And it's like, you have to build kind of a reputation. You have to build your trust. And we see this with friends and family. If you, like your family, you trust your family. I mean, for the most part, some people don't, rightfully so. But family and friends are usually fairly trustworthy because you kind of have a history with them. And you have this equity built between the two of you to where you kind of you've both reciprocated value before. And you're kind of familiar with each other. And this is kind of what a reputation system would do. It's like you kind of, if you could build this type of trust mechanism, this type of history between people, somehow build it in a smart, decentralized way into a blockchain, I think then you could kind of have the reputation system or the trust system. And if you could get that trust system figured out, then you could start doing non-digital things on a blockchain, I think, more easily, and it could actually really be good. So I think that is kind of a hard part. And I think as you kind of think about this stuff, it's not as straightforward as you might think. Like you might be like, okay, we want to have a trust system on a blockchain. Let's do it like eBay. Or like a site like that. Let's give somebody an ID and let's have trust, tied to that ID, right? So it's like, okay, well, first of all, we have like a privacy issue. It's like, when you're talking about ID, is this person anonymous? Like, or is it like going to be your actual name? Does it sound like a social security number? Because privacy is important. And like Bitcoin, you don't have those kind of issues. You don't need you can be anonymous. But if you're shipping somebody a package, or if you're like meeting them face to face, you're doing some type of physical exchange with them, it's like this can't necessarily fully be anonymous. It's like there's going to be traces of you tied to an ID. It's like that's kind of problematic, right? And then it's like, what metrics do you use to weigh somebody's reputation? Like, do you take into account their, like, how many transactions they've done? Do you do the quality of transactions, the cost? Do you do like something like Google PageRank, where it takes like other factors into consideration that other people, and like you have your own weight, and if you have a higher weight, it's going to weight more highly on somebody else? It's like, how do you measure that, and what metrics do you use? That's like another totally tricky part and concept. And then it's like, how would a non-violent punishment work? Because you have to enforce kind of contracts, and if somebody wants to do fraud and rip somebody off, right, and now that happens, it's like, well, what do you do about them? Do you just give them a nick on their reputation? Do you cut them off completely? It's like, if you're cutting somebody off from an economy completely, is that like Big Brother-ish now? Is this like worse than the government? So there's a lot of things to consider when talking about trust and a blockchain and an economy on a blockchain. And that's kind of, that's kind of where my head's at with it. And I want to kind of share that with you and get it out there. maybe somebody can run with it and figure something else out and add to it. But I think that is kind of where we look and what we need to talk about or think about if we want to do an economy or we want to do stuff with the blockchain outside of Bitcoin. Is we need to kind of think about the trust aspect, like would it have a reputation aspect, and that type of thing. And then also what ties in with that is like you're basically creating your own government. You're creating your own law. And it's like you want to have a non-violent law that's not going to step on the government's toes. And you want to do it better. And it's just tricky. It's like, I think if we can figure out how to do that, you're going to be in a very good spot and people would use it because people, I think, do want to have better ways to, exchange and interact with each other and just life in general. People want a better economy. They want a better government. So if you can come up with ways to do that with a blockchain that's superior in a way that doesn't interfere in a negative way with government, I think you're in a good spot and it's going to work well. But that is quite the challenge and it's pretty hard to do. And just in general, coming up with doing a government on law outside of the conventional way, that's something I'm really into quite a bit. And I've written a book sort of about that type of topic, basically about creating like a society outside of government. And if you want to check that out, you can. It's at crowdfreedom.com/book. And that's a free book to check out. I have a chapter going into like a legal system outside of the government. And that kind of could tie into a blockchain. And that is, it's kind of based around reputation and ostracization and non-violent legal ways of doing things. And it's like these things could be done, even if it's not a blockchain, it could still be done like open source or through some type of code or like a decentralized way. It doesn't have to be a blockchain necessarily, but a blockchain might have advantages if you can tie like trust and reputation into it. So something to think about, and hopefully that sheds some light on the issue. I know it's I probably repeated myself and it's probably a little confusing what I said. This was a really hard thing to write about because like I had to rack my brain on it, and it's something that's not really talked about a lot. So I'm like kind of just shooting from the hip here, but hopefully it provided some value and I wasn't just rambling. And it interests me because I like stuff like seasteading. I like stuff like private cities. I'm into that kind of thing. I'm into ways to do government better because the way I see it, government is like the worst industry we have. It's like the one industry that has the most control over us and that has like the biggest problems, like the legal system. It's like that's what needs improvement. And right now we can't compete and improve easily. It's like seasteading. That would be good if we could create like a city on the sea and compete that way, or create like a private city somehow and compete that way. That's awesome stuff. And I think that is what will move civilization forward very fast. And maybe if we could do some type of blockchain, not city, but a blockchain economy, a blockchain government, a blockchain legal system, contract system, some type of thing like that, I think that would move society forward a lot too. And that's kind of why I'm excited about this. I'm obviously not an expert, but it's something I enjoy, and hopefully I was able to shed some light on something for you, and maybe you can take this and provide maybe some good feedback or some other ideas to help kind of move this type of a topic and concept forward. So with that said, thank you very much for listening. If you made it this far and enjoyed it, please subscribe. And if you did not enjoy it, please subscribe. And like it, comment, and I will see you very soon with the next video. Thank you very much and have a great day.